In this video, we'll be looking at the graph capabilities within XPack. Through this video, we'll kind of talk about and define what a graph is. Then we'll jump over into Kibana and we'll look at the index patterns, fields we want to look at in our graph, and talk about the vertices and the connections as they call them, or nodes and edges. So what is a graph? The definition from Wikipedia is mathematical structures used to model pairwise relations between objects. A graph in this context is made up of vertices, nodes, or points which are connected by edges, arcs, or lines. So what we can do within Elasticsearch or in Kibana is we can use this graph capability to find valuable relationships between documents. So the graph plugin uses the concept of the indexed terms, and it looks for meaningful indexed terms. In that case, it's not just the terms that everyone has connected in these documents, like the word and or the word or, but instead it's going to start pivoting on words that are common but kind of rarely common, or common in a significant way between these two documents and not other documents. So this can be pretty useful if you're building any sort of data set where you want to dive through relationships. So you can look at fraud detection, you can see where a hacker starts on one computer and does lateral movement to another and another. You can kind of pivot from those data points. So let's jump into it and we'll talk about how we can use graphs in Kibana. So these are the steps we have to go through. So we'll kind of do this as a live demo. We'll look at the index patterns, the fields, the search, and the vertices and connections. All right, so if we go back to Kibana, I have disabled security, so we should just be able to go as we are. All right, so let's refresh our Kibana page to make sure that we are logged in new and we are not an existing user. All right, and now we are back into Kibana, and we can start looking at some of our data. So if we look at our New York restaurant data set, remember this data is about 5 or so years old. So we can change the time range up here, press search, and the data starts back in 2013 through 2015. Now let's click on graph. So this brings us into the graph page. We can select our index pattern that we want to look at. We'll pick New York City restaurants, and we'll add a field that we're going to start pivoting on. So grades are important within these inspections, so we'll pick on grade. Let's look at the top 10. So here, just like our most popular fields and the aggregations that we see on the Discover page, which we talked about, we can do the same thing here and talk about a different number of terms. So let's see, grades, we'll put an icon of A and we'll make them green. So now we can hit search. Nothing came up, and that is okay. Here we'll hit something else. We want to see the DBAs. Remember, these are the names of the buildings. So again, we'll do 10. Make this one look like a building. We'll make them red. We'll hit search. All right, and now let's do a star search. And here, you'll see in our force directed graph, this B is the grade of B. Over here we have an A. You can see Chenantla Restaurant got an A, as well as Andrew's Diner. So this is a nice way we could start building a clone of Yelp or something that says, hey, find me all the restaurants in the city that have a grade of A, and you can start at Kennedy Fried Chicken, move over to My Way Kitchen Restaurant, to Mia, to Muldoon's, so you can go different cities. Now, also you can see if you see any patterns with the C's. So an example in a restaurant grading check that I would look at potentially is, are there any names that are similar? So maybe you have a bunch of restaurants owned by the same person. Can you dig through a poor grade and find those? So we can click on some of these. Let's see, Country Fried Chicken, A, C. So we can do C, B, and we can invert it. We can look at select the neighbors. There are a whole lot of different things we can do. We can remove vertices. We can change the styles. We can drill in. So there's a lot of options we have in here. So here I just clicked on Crown Fried Chicken, hit expand, and it showed me these other nodes. I guess they also got a grade P and Z, whatever that may be. So that's how you look at this graph feature, and you can dig around and look at the data you have. You can explore the data in a very different way than you typically would. So when we're building this out, we're doing two things, if you're noticing. We picked the indices. We picked a couple fields. So these fields are the nodes in a graph. So this field value is Burger King, and therefore this node represents the name Burger King, Fuego Royal Restaurant, etc. This node here represents the grade, and this is a C. This connection here in the middle, this is your index or your vertex or your arc, depending on your terminology, but that's how you can see the connection. So if we had a lot more results in here, we could pull a lot more examples, but we don't. So you'll have to picture the best and figure out your data and look at your data and see what makes sense for graphs. All right, in our next video, we're going to jump into one of the newest features within the Elastic Stack. It's a machine learning capability that comes right out of the box, and it is extremely powerful and extremely easy to use.